In addition to altering guitar technique, Randy Rhoads changed the rules. He's not going to be around for long, I thought when I first met him. I have no idea why I thought that or anything else. But one of the most eerie tragedies in rock history marked the end of his meteoric rise. Now, more than 40 years later, the pieces are finally coming together thanks to unsettling hints and new theories. Was it something much more sinister, a tragic accident, or a careless joyride? Because what is coming to light does not only contradict the official narrative. Something darker could be exposed. If you're here, you're already aware that this story is more complex than the headlines. You are aware of the rumors. The speculation is visible to you. We're now delving deeply into the actual events of that Florida morning and the reasons why so many people continue to doubt that it was a freak crash. The crash that forever altered rock. Exactly 10 in the morning. Dated March 19, 1982. A catastrophe occurred that would rock the music industry. In Leesburg, Florida, Andrew Aycock, 36, piloted a small Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 aircraft that crashed. 58-year-old tour seamstress Rachel Youngblood and 25-year-old guitar virtuoso Randy Rhoads were on board. Less than 5 minutes passed during the flight. After clipping Ozzy Osbourne's tour bus, the plane's wing went out of control, slamming into a pine tree and a nearby garage in a terrifying series of events. All 3 passengers died instantly in the flaming explosion. It was a devastating loss that ended the life of one of the most influential and promising rock musicians. To repair the tour bus's malfunctioning air conditioning system, the band had made a stop at Flying Baron Estates that morning. It was supposed to be a brief break before they went to their next show. However, it was the scene of one of rock's most notorious and enigmatic mishaps rather than a place of rest. In addition to being the band's bus driver, Aycock was piloting the plane, which was taken without permission. He had a pilot's license, but it had expired due to medical reasons. Poor judgment was blamed for what transpired next, according to the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB. As a prank, they claimed, Aycock had taken the aircraft on a joyride and made several low passes over the sleeping tour bus in an attempt to wake the crew. On the 3rd try, however, something went horribly wrong. The plane struck the bus's roof. The left wing shears off as a result. This caused the plane to violently veer, crashing into a nearby garage with its nose down. When it hit, it exploded. There was fire everywhere. Later, witnesses, such as bassist Rudy Sarzo and keyboardist Don Air, would characterize the scene as apocalyptic. It appeared to be a conflict zone, Sarzo said. Body parts were lying around. The skies turned black with smoke. And in the center of it all were the burning remnants of the house, the aircraft, and any chance of saving the people inside. However, this is where the story becomes extremely disturbing. Authorities concluded that the incident was a careless stunt gone wrong. However, a number of strange, even terrifying, details expressed by band members and witnesses are not included in that version. The NTSB's explanation, according to several insiders, only provides a portion of the facts. The plane wasn't just flying low, it was having trouble, according to Don Air, who was outside the bus using a telephoto lens to take pictures of it. The plane was only 6 feet off the ground when he claimed to have seen a disturbance inside the cockpit, the wings twitching wildly from side to side, and the plane almost going diagonal. Just before the crash, Ari stopped taking pictures because she knew something was seriously amiss. There were others besides him. The most eerie segment? That plane was the last thing Randy Rhoads wanted to be on. Randy had never liked flying. Whenever possible, he stayed away from it. So why this time did he say yes? Randy only consented to fly in order to take some aerial photographs of the estate for his mother, according to people close to him. His music career had always been supported by them. It was only intended to be a quiet flight. Rachel had her doubts, too. She had disclosed to Aycock that she had a heart condition. According to reports, Aycock vowed to go easy and avoid any stunts or unexpected drops. It was supposed to be a quick ride around the grounds. There are only a few circles in the sky, nothing hazardous. Nevertheless, the NTSB's version, according to several insiders, only touches the surface. Exactly what are they saying? the last few hours of Randy Rhoads' life started off like any other tour day. Travel, fatigue, and excitement for the next step were all blurred. Ozzy Osbourne's band boarded their tour bus and started the overnight drive to their next destination on the evening of March 18, 1982, following a performance in Knoxville, Tennessee. Sometime in the early hours of March 19, the bus's air conditioning system started to malfunction. They were on their way to Orlando, Florida. The decision was made to take a brief detour to Flying Baron Estates, a private air park in Leesburg that housed the bus company's headquarters. Before continuing, it was intended to be a routine stop for upkeep and rest. Rather, the setting would serve as the backdrop for one of the most horrifying and puzzling tragedies in rock music. The neighborhood of Flying Baron Estates was not like any other. The neighborhood was developed around private runways, and locals actually parked their aircraft in hangars in their backyards. Here, the band Groggy, who had been traveling overnight, parked the tour bus while the majority of the crew slept. The band's tour bus driver and licensed pilot, Andrew Aycock, made the decision to fly as dawn broke. Although Aycock was not authorized or scheduled to fly, he was able to use a Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 that was parked on the property. What came next was a series of choices that are still eerily unfathomable. Along with keyboardist Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan, Aycock set out for his first joyride of the day at around 9 in the morning. Both Duncan and Airey described the atmosphere as playful. Aycock returned safely after flying low and purposefully buzzing the bus to wake the crew who were sleeping inside. Those on the ground were said to have laughed at the stunt. However, as is often the case with reckless thrills, one successful stunt frequently leads to another, and this time the risk would be lethal. Aycock invited Randy Rhoads and the band's 58-year-old seamstress, Rachel Youngblood, to the second flight. Both were renowned for avoiding needless danger. Due to her heart condition, Rachel had previously stated that she was reluctant to fly. Randy was infamously terrified of flying as well. Frequently, he had chosen to remain grounded rather than take short flights at all. However, he consented to take some aerial pictures of the estate for his mother on this specific morning rather than pursuing an adrenaline rush. A calm flight was promised by Aycock once more. No dives or loops, just a few slow passes for a few pictures. The sound was innocuous. The aircraft took off just before 10 in the morning. And on-the-ground witnesses initially thought it would have the same pattern as the first flight. What transpired, however, was anything but ordinary. Almost immediately, Don Airey, who was taking pictures of the flight from outside the bus, realized something was wrong. Inside the cockpit, he noticed an odd commotion through his telephoto lens. The wings of the aircraft were swaying more violently than before. It was not a game. It appeared alarmed. And then catastrophe struck. The bus's roof was clipped by the Beechcraft's left wing during the third low pass over it. The plane spun out of control after the impact tore the wing from the fuselage. It crashed into a pine tree in a matter of seconds before plunging nose-first into a garage that was connected to a neighboring mansion. The explosion happened instantly. Black smoke and flames filled the crash site. An unfathomable scene of devastation greeted those who fled the bus to assist. There were no survivors. This is where few people talk about it, though. The original plan was not for Randy to travel alone on that flight. Additionally invited to go up that morning was Randy's close friend and bassist Rudy Sarzo, who plays for Ozzy. When on tour, the two frequently did everything together, including sightseeing, late-night excursions, and sometimes even flying. Rudy, however, declined this day since he was exhausted and it was meant to be a day off. He declined the invitation to accompany Randy for once. He would live with the consequences of that choice. Rudy would later claim that he only felt tired and not premonitory. However, he was protected from the flames by his impulsive decision to sleep in. He thinks that decision was predetermined for him by fate. And in a cruel turn of events, Randy might have been able to board the flight he might not have otherwise due to his absence. However, Randy wasn't the only person who was on that plane. And what kept Rudy Sarzo alive might have been Randy's undoing. Rudy Sarzo was haunted by the choice. Even seemingly insignificant decisions can have the most profound effects. One choice still has resonance over 40 years later for Rudy Sarzo, the bassist for Ozzy Osbourne and a close friend of Randy Rhoads. Rudy was given the opportunity to board a small plane that was taking off early on March 19, 1982, in order to make a brief low pass around the tour bus. He would have said yes without hesitation in a normal situation. He and Randy shared almost everything while on tour, including meals and impromptu excursions. However, for reasons he still finds difficult to articulate, Rudy declined that morning. The plan was for the day to be off. He was exhausted after a lengthy run of performances and travel. It seemed like a good idea to stay behind and get a few more hours of sleep. Although it was a rare instance of indulgence at the time, that choice would become more significant than he could have ever imagined within an hour. He was asked to board the plane that was carrying Randy Rhoads and Rachel Youngblood, but it clipped the tour bus and then crashed in a fiery explosion. Rudy Sarzo remained safe and broken, while the 3 people on board perished instantly. The survivor's guilt consumed Rudy, and he would talk about it frequently and candidly in the years that followed. He recalled watching his tour manager yell, "They're gone," as he fled the bus after waking up to the sound of the explosion. "They're all gone." Rudy was initially unaware of the passengers. The realization that it was his musical brother Randy made him feel as though the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He's referred to as that day, the turning point in my life. And the grief never went away, regardless of how much time had gone by. Rudy doesn't think Randy's death was in vain, though. He claims that the trajectory of the crash indicates that Randy may have taken action in his last moments. Rudy is certain that Randy may have saved the lives of all those on board by guiding the doomed plane away from the tour bus. Although the wing of the Beechcraft touched the bus roof, it did not pierce or collide with it. Rudy thinks the plane would have struck the bus's full side and killed everyone inside if it had been even a few feet lower. Randy claimed to have saved us. There is no doubt in my mind. This idea goes beyond simple emotional coping. The peculiar pattern of the crash serves as its foundation. There was not much damage to the bus. The impact was high enough to tear off a wing, but it didn't kill anyone inside who was sleeping. It's an eerie picture. Randy knew the collision was coming. To steer the aircraft away from his fellow musicians. If accurate, his last act was one of bravery, instinct, and selflessness. Don Airy, an eyewitness, added a startling visual detail that reinforces the notion that something was seriously wrong inside the aircraft. Using his camera, Airy had taken close-up pictures of the cockpit using a telephoto lens. He saw that it was not a serene ride. Chaos reigned. The aircraft wobbled as if it were being fought over, he said, its wings tipping wildly. Airy stated that there was a struggle. In there, something was going on. Before hitting the ground, the plane tipped almost vertically. Not just a poorly thought-out stunt. Someone appeared to have lost control or to be making a valiant effort to regain it. That begs troubling questions. What went wrong on the second flight if a cock had taken a smooth circuit earlier that morning? Randy was unwilling to ascend. Rachel suffered from a heart condition. The previous evening, a cock was allegedly having a good time. And there was a serious problem inside that small cockpit. Given that Icock had already flown once and Randy had no desire to fly, what caused the mayhem in the cockpit? Daisley's theory, Bob. The official narrative surrounding Randy Rhoads' death has largely remained uncontested in the decades since his passing until former Ozzy Osbourne bassist Bob Daisley came forward with a theory that completely changed the game. Pilot recklessness and cocaine-fueled bravado may not have been the cause of the crash, Daisley said. Rather, he thinks something much more tragic and unpredictably happened before the tragedy happened. A heart attack in midair. Not just any heart attack, though. Rachel Youngblood, the band's adored seamstress and one of the 3 passengers on that fateful flight, had one. When Daisley presented this theory in a Talk Louder podcast episode, the rock community was instantly impacted. He claimed that because the Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 was a dual-control aircraft, the yoke and pedals were accessible from both front seats. If Rachel, who was sitting next to Aycock, had a heart attack and passed out unexpectedly, her weight might have put a lot of pressure on the controls. She might have forced the aircraft into an unanticipated and fatal dive if she had stumped the rudder or yoke, even unintentionally. Because of its notorious V-tail design, the kind of aircraft they were flying is notoriously hard to stabilize once it spins. According to Daisley, it's possible that the pilot just couldn't get better in time. Here's the devastating detail that backs up his theory. It has been reported that Rachel refused to board that aircraft. She had told the crew openly about her heart condition. She informed Akak that morning that she didn't feel well and that she didn't think flying was a good idea. Akak allegedly promised to be gentle with her after taking Don Air and Jake Duncan on a low-key, showboating flight. He supposedly told her, no stunts, just a calm loop or two. Randy's decision to go up and take aerial photos and his assurances might have persuaded her that it was safe. Nevertheless, it's possible that those brief moments in the air were too much. Daisley claims that the autopsy showed that Rachel had in fact experienced a heart attack before the impact. It was not a rumor. The fact was medical. It's possible that this minor but catastrophic incident led to a cockpit environment that was impossible for any pilot, even one who was sober and well-trained, to control. Sitting next to her, Akak might have overcorrected or panicked. By now, the aircraft was flying low, with little remaining altitude. Shortly after, the plane began to spiral downward, slamming into a nearby garage, a pine tree, and the bus. However, Daisley's theory also poses questions even though it gives the narrative an unexpected and extremely tragic dimension. Akak is portrayed as a victim of circumstances rather than the careless villain that many had assumed, for starters. That runs counter to a lot of what other band members have said, which characterizes Akak as unpredictable and potentially influenced by. Indeed, that was later verified in Akak's system by the FAA's toxicology report, supporting the idea that he was intoxicated at the time of the collision. Furthermore, his past is a factor that could alter our understanding of everything. Andrew Akak was more than just a bus driver who also worked as a pilot. 6 years prior, in the United Arab Emirates, he had been a part of another deadly collision. Although the specifics of that incident are still unknown, it is unsettling to learn that he had a previous death on his aviation record. The fact that his aviation medical certificate had expired, making him legally ineligible to fly that day, is even more concerning. With passengers in particular, he had no business operating the controls. A more sinister possibility, however, suggests that this was no accident at all. An Akak's past is at its core. What did Andrew Akak conceal? Since Randy Rhoads' untimely death, Andrew Akak, the man at the heart of it all, has continued to be a controversial and shadowy figure. Frequently dismissed as the bus driver or pilot in the official investigation. The report contained much more than just Akak's name. His complicated and potentially problematic past has given rise to a plethora of theories regarding what actually transpired in the skies over Leesburg, Florida, on that March morning in 1982. Let's begin by reviewing the facts. Akak was not a pilot at the time of the accident. He was officially working as a tour bus driver for Ozzy Osbourne. He had, however, worked in aviation. Although he was a certified pilot years before, he was legally prohibited from transporting passengers due to the expiration of his aviation medical certificate. Even worse, 6 years prior, Akak had been a part of a fatal crash in the United Arab Emirates. There are still few details about that incident. However, the association is unsettling. The coincidence of two deadly aviation accidents that were connected by the same man but occurred at different times is too unsettling to ignore. Whence, then, was he operating a private plane that morning? Why was he permitted to pilot a plane with passengers on board? The Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 Iciosi was reportedly not his property. There are reports that it was taken without the owner's consent and stored on the Flying Baron Estates airstrip. That in and of itself suggests a careless sense of entitlement or possibly a dismissal of the consequences. Some who knew him or saw his behavior that evening may not even consider his actions to be an example of poor judgment, as the NTSB would later claim. The findings of toxicology reports raise serious questions about the notion that this was a simple error. When the crash occurred, he was under the influence of Akak. This information directly challenges Bob Daisley's hypothesis that, up until Rachel Youngblood's purported heart attack, the flight was quiet and under control. Akak was partying all night before the crash, according to witnesses, and he probably used stimulants to get through the late hours. If accurate, this presents a completely different image. One of a drunk man engaging in risky behavior and treating a lethal machine like a toy. But the dark doesn't stop there. One of the most unsettling rumors that circulated in the aftermath has never been proven false definitively. Several sources claim that Aycock's ex-wife was on the tour bus that morning. Even during the plane's frequent flyovers, she is reportedly close to the car. Rumor has it that the dramatic low passes and stunts weren't done merely for laughs or to wake up the crew. Maybe they were meant for her? Could this have been a bad stunt disguised as a purposeful outburst of rage? An unanswered question remains. It was never intended for Randy Rhoads to quietly fade into rock history. His ascent was swift, and his impact was instantaneous. But even before he stepped onto that fateful plane in March 1982, he was already imagining a life away from the heavy metal limelight. He was a classical student and aspiring composer in addition to being a rock guitarist. A musician with discipline who aimed for more than just notoriety. Sadly, everything came to an end just as he was getting ready to start a new chapter in his life. According to reports, Randy was getting ready to leave the touring lifestyle. Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz, two groundbreaking albums with Ozzy Osbourne, had led him to start telling friends and family that he wanted to return to school. It's not for show. Not for marketing. For enthusiasm. Following in his mother's footsteps as a student and teacher, he intended to enroll in UCLA's master's program in classical music. By exploring theory, composition, and performance, Randy aimed to go back to the things that initially motivated him to pick up a guitar as a youngster. He'd already asked questions. In fact, his mother had started talking to the university. Randy was not kidding, nor was he dreaming. He was actually making an effort to give up touring. There was no breakdown or burnout here. It was a deliberate change in direction toward purity. He cherished metal. Ozzy was his favorite. He was even more of a fan of music as a language, though. The loss meant more to Ozzy Osbourne than just a professional setback. The foundation of his solo comeback had been Randy. Ozzy's career was actually saved by many credit Rhoads after he left Black Sabbath. An entire era of heavy music was defined by his fusion of classical and metal music. But it was more than just records and riffs that united them. They had mutual understanding. Each one balanced the other. Chaos was Ozzy. Randy had structure. Ozzy had so much energy. Randy was brilliant in a quiet way. Not holding back, the Prince of Darkness wrote his autobiography, I Am Ozzy. Randy was a gift from God, according to him. After Randy passed away, he claimed he nearly gave up music completely. The sadness was incapacitating. Ozzy had lost a friend in addition to their bandmate. A brother, a kinship mate. Ozzy wrote, "It's another matter entirely to have someone like Randy Rhoads play on 2 albums and for those 2 albums to sound as good as the day they were recorded. Where that man would be now, only God knows. And that's what fans are most tormented by. What might Randy Rhoads have turned into?" He passed away at the age of 25. Merely touching the surface of his brilliance. Generations of musicians continue to credit him as a major influence. From Zakk Wylde to Tom Morello, from Kirk Hammett to innumerable underground guitarists, Randy's name is revered. Additionally, it's due to what he could have played as well as what he actually played. The albums he never recorded, the solos he never wrote. He never taught the students. He didn't have a promising future. It was blinding. However, the uncertainty surrounding his death haunted the music industry just as much as the grief over his passing. Despite his fear of flying, why did Randy board that aircraft? Why was a bus driver with a revoked license and a record in his system allowed to board a private plane? Why didn't anyone intervene? Why are accounts of the last moments of the flight so contradictory? Insiders like Bob Daisley provide theories that defy the official explanation, but why? But what if Randy wasn't simply lost that day to the music industry? What if it, too, lost the truth? In reality, what took place that day? There should have been nothing noteworthy about the morning of March 19, 1982. A pause. To reassemble before the next performance and fix a bus. Rather, it turned into one of the somber and most contentious days in rock history. There was more to Randy Rhoads' death than tragedy. It was enmeshed in ambiguity, paradox, and decades of unresolved issues. Fans, musicians, and those who were present are still plagued by the mystery of what actually transpired in that cockpit as the years pass. The narrative was fractured from the start. Pilot error, the result of bad judgment and careless flying, was the official description. In an alleged prank to wake the crew who were sleeping, Isozi, the former bus driver who later became a pilot, buzzed the band's tour bus several times in a private aircraft. That version, however, soon started to fall apart. Witnesses reported a more concerning situation. Violent swaying of the aircraft, a potential cockpit conflict, and actions that weren't consistent with a fun and safe joyride. That morning, the band's keyboardist, Don Airy, was outside the bus with a camera. The images he took with his telephoto lens in the moments before the crash ran counter to the notion of a pilot in complete control. Its wings tipped wildly. The plane nearly went vertical. Movement inside the cockpit was erratic, disturbing, and suggested a struggle for dominance. Shortly after, the bus was clipped by the wing. The plane broke apart, and a fireball destroyed the dancers and the aircraft, killing 3 people. Divergent theories began to emerge. Some pointed to Aycox's past, a cancelled aviation medical certificate, a prior fatal accident, and verified his system. Some, such as former Australian bassist Bob Daisley, cited Rachel Youngblood's health issues, implying that she suffered a heart attack in midair and unintentionally plunged the dual-controlled aircraft into a cliff. The crash was framed as a possible act of retaliation disguised as recklessness because there were even rumors that Aycox's ex-wife had been standing close to the bus and that the flybys might have been intended for her. These theories were not tabloid-worthy. They came from those who had been affected by the band and were close to them. Each version is pieced together from bits and pieces, though, because Randy, Rachel, and Aycox are unable to speak. Autopsy reports, half-remembered conversations, hazy pictures, and memories tainted by trauma. And maybe the most annoying reality of all is that closure is out of the question. No firm response, no admission, and no fresh proof. The what-ifs are all that are left. What if Randy hadn't been sitting in that plane and Rudy Sarzo had? What if Aycox hadn't been allowed to fly? What if the group had chosen a different path or postponed the journey by only 1 hour? How about if Randy had declined? As a result, Ozzy Osbourne was devastated. It was up to Sharon Osbourne to keep the band together. For reporters and investigators, the crew had to relive the incident because they were overcome with grief and survivor's guilt. The family of Randy was devastated. His parents, siblings, and pupils. The passing of a rising star whose best work was yet to come was lamented by the entire world. However, Randy Rhoads became immortal even after he passed away. In 2021, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame posthumously. Aspiring musicians are still studying his guitar solos. Genres that didn't even exist when he was alive are influenced by him. Beyond the legacy of sound, however, Randy left behind another mystery that might never be resolved. One thing is certain, regardless of whether the crash was caused by substance abuse, an unforeseen medical emergency, or something much darker. There was no place for Randy Rhoads on that aircraft. What do you believe to be Randy Rhoads' true fate? Was there more to it than a tragic accident? In the comments section below, share your theories. Remember to hit the bell, like, and subscribe because we have more untold rock history stories that you won't want to miss. If you thought this was intense, you'll be amazed by our next video. It's darker still.